Welcome, everyone, to Reclamation, a beEmboldened initiative, where we focus on the prevention of and healing from spiritual abuse. Narcissism has become a popular reference in U.S. culture, maybe beyond, over the past handful of years, without a lot of clarity, I would say, for the general public. So with this being said, I wanted to offer you a conversation from someone who knows, both from an educational standpoint, from a lived professional standpoint of coming alongside clients in this context. And I've been looking so forward to this conversation because I really think it's going to serve the beEmboldened audience well. I really think it's going to serve you well. I am hopeful at the end of this conversation, you're going to feel like you have a more solid footing in this conversation as you're going forward with your own story, wondering about maybe people in your life, probably leaders in your life, people who have held positions of authority, and maybe even those in your personal life as well, who you're connected with. So with that, I want to introduce Josh. And Josh is a licensed professional counselor and supervisor. He serves as a CEO of Rivers Edge Counseling and Wellness. Josh works with a variety of clients. He specializes in trauma, PTSD, and narcissistic personality disorder, which is what we're going to more so focus on today. He has a master's in clinical mental health counseling from Denver Seminary. And Josh has worked in the counseling field for over 15 years. So I actually totally forgot that, Josh, that we have this, we're alumni.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Wonderful Denver Seminary.
Yes. So actually, this is fun fact. And I'm going to say this as a shameless plug for anyone who is listening to this and they hear it before mid-September. Our first in-person conference is happening this fall, September 12th and 13th. And we just heard back from Denver Seminary that they're going to sponsor us.
Wonderful.
And I was just so excited that they're loving what we're doing and they want to support what we're doing. And like, oh, good. They don't want to disown me because of what I'm doing. That's always a good thing, right?
Absolutely. No, Denver Seminary is very near and dear to my heart. My wife's getting her doctorate and got her master's there. And so it's a good place. Many fond memories.
Yes, definitely. A lot of good hard work. Fond memories as well. So with that, Josh, let's jump in and we're going to start with what is narcissism and how does it come about?
Oh, that's a great question. So narcissism, I think, is something that we just have so many different definitions of, and a lot of people know just enough to be dangerous. So you've probably heard about, kind of these elevated views of self or grandiosity. You may have heard about little to no empathy, and all these are true, but I find that usually people then get kind of caught in the weeds with like, okay, but what really differentiates? And so we'll talk more about how polarizing a topic this is as we go. But if I'm really trying to boil down kind of three key ingredients to narcissism, we're going to be talking about black and white thoughts. We're going to be talking about a highly elevated view of self plus a kind of insatiable need for that view to be recognized by others. And then lastly, the one we've already mentioned, we're going to be talking about almost no capability to truly empathize. And so what happens is you can look at the DSM, you can talk with experts, and there will be plenty of other ways they can kind of riff off of those ideas. But when you have anyone that has those three ingredients, they are in a self-perpetuating cycle where they're going to dig deeper and deeper into a pattern of becoming progressively more narcissistic. And so in my opinion, it really feels like almost a cancer of the mind. If you have a stage 1 narcissist, it is over time going to get worse if it goes untreated or unchecked.
So you're speaking to a progression, and with that progression, and I might be getting out of order, but this is what's coming to mind for now. So we'll come back to the how it comes about. So everyone who's like, wait, Naomi, be quiet. I wanted to hear how it comes about. We'll come back to that. I promise. I won't forget. But because there's a progression that we will typically see with someone, at what point does it become narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, versus what are our options prior to it being NPD?
That's a great question. So I would say there's kind of a spectrum first off. And so you'll kind of hear me say, if someone has none of these traits, they're very nuanced, they have really good ability to empathize, those kinds of things, they're not on the scale. They're a 0 out of 100. But when we have people that particularly have a fair bit of these traits, a 20, a 30 out of 100, those kinds of things, it's going to self-fulfill a prophecy. So if you kind of think of like an infinity symbol, you have someone that starts off with a really high view of themselves, and then they have black and white thoughts. that's going to prove to them that they are right in their own eyes. That's going to prove that they don't even really need to waste their time empathizing. And because they don't waste their time empathizing, they get better and better about thinking well of themselves and being more right. And so you hear a lot of special language. You hear a lot of kind of particular calling, especially in ministry circles, from someone who's a narcissist. And it just kind of goes round and round in that way. And so I would say, to answer your question, when you think of that pattern back and forth for narcissism, when someone really gets to a level to where they have no ability to empathize, when faults almost always need to be someone else's fault first, and then the narcissist reacted. And so apologies are, let's say it's a husband and wife couple, for example, because I do a lot of marriage work. If it's a husband that's saying, well, yes, I yelled at my wife and I was terrible to her because she overspent at such and such place. There's no admission of initial guilt. There's no admission of I am wrong. There's only saying, well, because she made the first infraction, then I am almost justified in narcissistic lingo. I'm excused because she really made the first foul. And so the inability to have original fault is one of the things that, in my opinion, is a tipping point for when it's diagnosable narcissism.
Something that's interesting to me about that is there are so many people that I knew, say in my early 20s, or when they were in their early 20s, who would fit that. But over time, it changes. Over time, they grew, right? So there was a maturing that happened. There's growth that happens versus the more so progression of what you just shared, where someone's actually getting further entrenched in that direction instead of moving away from that direction. And so I also want to give that as a caveat for anyone who's thinking, oh my goodness, my 16-year-old is a narcissist. Well, maybe.
Hopefully they grow.
But go ahead. How would you respond to that, Josh?
Well, I mean, kind of tongue in cheek in some ways. I have joked before that why junior high is so very few people's favorite times is because junior high students are so underdeveloped. Their prefrontal cortex isn't there yet, that it's kind of a whole bunch of kids running around with personality disorders. So while I don't think that narcissists or anyone else with a personality disorder are fully junior high-esque, you can kind of see some similarities. I mean, just talk to, a child or a niece or nephew you have that are around that age, and it's vicious. It's a jungle. And you see so much of that just fight, flight reaction, very little ability to slow down and nuance, and just kind of me versus you, kind of dog eat dog environment. So yeah, I would actually say, fortunately, we don't tend to diagnose narcissism until the prefrontal cortex is fully developed. So after age 25 to 28.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's an excellent point. Going back to part B of the question, because I almost did forget, everyone. I know everyone would be like, you can't hear me holding you accountable. You did forget. How does it come about?
So the classic answer was that it used to come about through trauma. So like the way I was taught, which was many years ago, was, you have either childhood trauma, like horrific sexual abuse, physical abuse, or you have an environment that is in itself extremely black and white. So if you had an incredibly cold parent as well as an incredibly praising parent, it gets to where you have such different views of yourself that it's really, really hard for that not to create deep shame for someone who becomes a narcissist. And then they cover that up by the bravado. They become the Wizard of Oz, who has this wonderful legend, this legacy to them. And yet really they're the small little bald man hiding behind the curtain, just terrified of being found out. And so I think that is an example that we still see holds true sometimes to narcissism. And to be clear, of course, that doesn't mean everyone that has, an overly flattering parent and an overly cold one becomes a narcissist. We're just saying that's a dwelling ground for complex trauma that can lead to narcissism as well as many other things. Now, what we're starting to find that I think is really fascinating, and what I hope more and more research gets done on, is we're seeing more people that were not narcissistic in high school or young adulthood. And then over time, they start to really manifest a lot more narcissistic traits. And that should be a horrifying fact for any ministry, for any business, the fact that you might actually have someone who really just seems to fester in ways that they did not have before. And so there's different reasons why that we could dive into much deeper on that. But now what we're seeing is a lot of decision fatigue, a lot of untreated trauma, and a lot of different anxiety disorders that go into fight mode and kind of fester in that way. They kind of solidify like, okay, I am just, I am a fist and everyone is a face that I want to hit, that type of just kind of combative nature. The good news is those narcissists are more treatable in my experience. And so even coming around to maybe a future question, I do believe that God is the healer that we are not, and that with people getting really good treatment, with really throwing themselves into the healing process, even someone who's diagnosably narcissistic can slowly change over time, even to the point where it wouldn't be a correct description.
I can definitely imagine, based on the conversations I have with the population, in which I serve, I can definitely see where narcissism could appear over time for those reasons that you mentioned. The decision fatigue I've seen play out where someone basically has a need to protect themselves from more being taken. And it can be such a almost fight kind of response of, I have to shut this down. And so someone can then come across more aggressive than they intended to. And it's coming from a genuine place of need. There is a need. There's a need for rest. There's a need for the breaks. There's a need for support. The trauma. I mean, I think this is common knowledge at this point in our culture that those in ministry can oftentimes feel like they don't have a safe place to turn to be able to share what they're struggling with.
Absolutely.
And so that can be a genuine need. And so, yes, things are not being tended to. And none of this is to, and I'm curious what you would think about this, Josh. Here's how I would say it. None of this is to place blame on someone who has been harmed by this imaginary person that we're referencing right now.
Of course.
It is just understanding that people arrive in places through typically a series of events, circumstances, their own personality, their mental health, their physiological elements, of course, can be at play depending on what we're talking about. So there's a lot that goes into it. So it's not to excuse it. It's not to minimize it. I do think it's helpful to have more understanding and maybe see ways in which we as a culture, particularly our ministry culture, could make changes so that it's not such a breeding ground for such problems. Again, without putting blame on those who have been harmed. Never. I would never do that.
Completely agree. And I think that's even just so important to name with the polarization of, it's so easy for this term to either feel like, okay, are there really narcissists for some people? Is this all, complex trauma? Is this all anxiety? Is it all burnout and decision fatigue? And that can so often minimize the truly devious nature of a narcissist, just kind of that ruthless, abusive, traumatizing side. And so I love that you're even pointing out like that's not going to minimize things, while also recognizing that these are individuals who have caused massive harm for usually dozens or hundreds of people around them. And yet that does not mean that they are so far cast out that there's no chance of healing, of treatment, of them improving.
Yes, it's sort of I think how I'm hearing it, Josh, is that interplay between, and not everyone is a victim, not everyone's a perpetrator, there isn't always a hero, so I'm not playing into that triangle because that does not always exist. But someone who has been a victim in ways in lives, they have suffered through things, who then can respond by perpetrating in ways versus making a different decision and how they are going to approach what has happened to them, what has been done to them, what has been taken from them, how they're going to embrace healing and being able to move forward. And that's something, of course, as a support professional, I really believe in is, yes, we have all been through things and we have been through hard things. And how are we going to respond to those hard things in the best way that we can with, oh my gosh, so much grace and mercy, I hope, because it is difficult. And I think about that sometimes within my own family, for example, coming from a larger family. There's a lot of us, and we've all handled this in different ways, and it's landed us in different places. And so decisions made, again, some personality elements at play, some different beliefs that are held, like it gets complex. There's more nuance to it.
Of course.
And yet I do have to believe that we have a choice not to head towards narcissism, that we do have a choice to handle this differently. Would you agree or disagree with that? Do you think if someone's a narcissist, it's just they're going to be one? Or do you think that they can choose before we get to the, oh, they are, and now they're seeing you, Josh, they're going to you
Right.
for change? Do they have a choice beforehand?
They do, but I want to definitely emphasize how hard a choice that is. So like I had many years ago, and I'll, kind of change the story slightly for confidentiality, but I had a young man come see me once who was talking about basically this really, really hard decision that he made of, do I go back in and take credit with the boss? And he had done something that someone else had stolen credit for, and he had very much the narcissistic patterns. And so he was weighing this decision of, do I go in? But if I'm going in to take credit to just be more accurate with my boss, is that just me wanting praise? Am I wanting him to just be like, you know what, John, you're a great guy, and there should be more hard workers like you at this place? And for some of us, that might be an hour. Some of us, that might be a minute. Some might even think on a decision of like, do I talk to my boss or do I let it slide for a day? This was about 6 months of this young man really wrestling with, what are my motives here? And I've seen that happen with narcissists, where there's just so much layer upon layer of, no, I am right. No, my opinion is true and everyone else's is suspect or even dangerous. That really being able to peel that back, being able to analyze and look at themselves. I mean, that's kind of like just you and me casually saying, oh, you're going to run a marathon tomorrow? Like, it's a monumental effort that takes a lot of time to really go there. So I do believe that narcissists can choose this, but I also think they're so far behind in that ability to self-assess and really be even honest with themselves about their motives, that it feels like speaking a foreign language for that person to really be like able to just kind of introspect.
Right. The awareness just is not there to catch it.
Correct. Which is part of why they're so good at so many other things. I kind of love the old Sherlock Holmes stories of Sherlock's the genius detective, but he doesn't know that the, Earth orbits the sun because it doesn't affect his detective work. I think narcissists are kind of like that. If they spend all of their mind, body, and energy in self-glorification, then they're usually pretty good at teaching. They're usually pretty good about people skills and things like that, and pulling the wool over our eyes because they've spent no time actually just becoming a healthy person.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Because that self-awareness, that introspection, and then the work that can come along with it, that can feel like a full-time job at times in certain
Absolutely.
seasons.
You and I have both had many full-time job levels with that, with ourselves personally and others.
Right.
And if you spend zero time there, imagine all the extra time you have to really wordsmith that perfect sermon, really be able to deliver that perfectly adept way of getting someone else in trouble while looking innocent. I mean, it's kind of horrifying the amount of mental energy that has gone towards destruction.
Wow. I had not thought about it that way before. Yeah, that is impactful. I have a feeling some of our listeners are pausing here too and like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. When we focus more heavily in an area, we're typically going to see strengths come out of that. So for those of us who are choosing the introspection, the self-awareness, the taking a look at ourselves, and like I said, recognizing and then continuing to want to see movement in that area, we also will see movement in that area. So let that be encouraging. We will.
Absolutely.
I love to remind people of that, of, okay, while it's necessary to be here where we are right now, we need not remain here forever. We can journey forward somewhere else. So, and you said that is the case for people who are narcissistic. They have that narcissistic thinking as well, that narcissistic leaning, or full on NPD, if that is an appropriate diagnosis. So Would you speak to that a little bit? And again, well, I know we're still out of order, everyone. No one else can see my questions in front of me. We're still out of order, but we're just going to stay out of order because I would love to hear your answer.
And speak to which area, like as far as kind of those thought patterns?
So as far as someone who has NPD, let me pause there actually, because would it be different if someone qualifies for the DSM diagnosis or not? Is there a distinction there for you in how you are approaching someone who comes to you for support?
Honestly, no. And I actually think this is one of the biggest areas that I try to emphasize with clients, because I specialize in working with people who are narcissists. But that also means I deal with a lot of people. I work with so many people who have been the collateral damage, who have been the survivors of a narcissist. And one of the most common questions I get asked is some level like, well, how narcissistic is this person, or are they a narcissist? Which, of course, if I'm meeting with someone who's survived that person, the leader, the parent, the whoever, I don't know, but I'll still try to go off their feedback. But one of the things I try to tell people is if they are on the spectrum, if they're a 20 out of 100 and they're maybe not even fully diagnosable, but they still have a lot of those traits, that person is actually, in my opinion, often more damaging than a 80, 90, or 100 out of 100 narcissist. So not even just someone who's diagnosable, but someone who is so narcissistic it's almost off the scale. And I actually think people who are not quite diagnosable are more dangerous because of the patterns that they have.
Would it also be because they are less detectable?
Exactly.
Whereas when I see someone it's extreme, it's pretty easy, at least once we know what it looks like. Now, I wouldn't say it's pretty easy necessarily the first time, depending on the environment you've been in, and maybe you've seen some of those more covert versions in the past. I'm not saying that someone would necessarily pinpoint it instantly, but once we know what it looks like, someone who's way up there, close to that 100, we're probably going to smell it a mile away.
Right. No, I think so often conviction for someone that's more mildly narcissistic or has more of the traits, but still can kind of empathize, can still give a sort of apology. Very often that's more dangerous because they get on, the leadership board at this organization. They become, the prime manager that everyone really loves, and rightfully so, has a lot to admire about this person. But then whoever's competition keeps kind of getting stabbed in the back or even ends up leaving, and you never know why. And so often someone that more has the traits but can still kind of pass all these little kind of ways we try to sniff out a narcissist is actually the one that will have a wider reach of more people that they affect. And especially because they will also themselves get worse over time, like we talked about. I think a mildly narcissistic person in their 20s becomes a moderately narcissist in their 30s and is diagnosable by 40.
Okay. Would you mind giving some more examples? Of course, not real life examples, but helping to paint the picture for someone. What is the difference between what is real narcissism versus what is that pop psychology? Because we'll hear that, similarly to people are traumatized by Starbucks being out of their favorite syrup. Anyone can be a narcissist right now.
Hey, don't minimize the syrup being gone. No, I'm just teasing.
I know. I'm ready for fall syrups, and I will be sad when they run out of them.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that we tend to be maybe misconstruing about narcissism is conflict. Like very often we hear, oh, that's a narcissist, is a person that has conviction or someone that has a really intense, hard conversation. And that can be traumatizing to people. We're not trying to minimize that. But a narcissist is not in and of itself just someone who's been really mean or been really harsh to you, or someone that's even lost their temper in some ways. Like that's maybe traumatizing, but it may not be narcissism. I think the level of can this person repair in genuine ways is one of the differentiators from maybe just a jerk of a human being or someone that has their own trauma and is just cold and cruel. What really makes narcissism set apart is the fact that that person is going to really see anyone else as a threat just by nature of the fact that that other person exists. And so when we talk about trauma, very often I'm meeting with people who will use the word narcissism. And of course, their experience I want to hear and really be able to sift through. But you'll be able to hear repair. You'll be able to hear contriteness eventually, or an after conversation actually having genuine healing to it. And I think narcissists really have a lot more of a feeling of fear and paranoia to them than many people out there who are traumatizing others but are not narcissistic.
So when someone is feeling like everyone is a threat, when we meet someone where they're operating from that place, is there a tell that that is what they're doing?
I would say it's hard to see an obvious tell. I would, in general, the biggest one that I would say that's consistent is other people. Like, let's say you work, just at a normal business. You work at, Chase Bank or something like that. For someone that might be fairly competitive, might be very type A, or even just kind of a rude jerk of a person, that person will not necessarily be really waiting to retaliate when other people get praise. It might be competitive, but they'll say, okay, I need to work harder. Or they might really try to make sure that they, really get in good with the boss or whatever it is. But I think in general, one of the tells I see for someone who's a narcissist is good things happen to others. To them feels like something has been stolen from them. So if other people got a raise, they see it as a zero-sum game. They got money and I did not, so they have stolen from me. They have slighted me. And in some things, that may be true, that there's only so much money to go around at a job. But when it comes to praise, when it comes to care, when it comes to other people just having a few minutes of a boss or a really, great leader's time, a narcissist will see that as something stolen from themselves. And so you'll see that as a pretty consistent sign, as well as someone that is overall really trying to just be aloof. They're great at their job. They're great at moving up the corporate ladder, but you can never really get to know them. They kind of keep you at an arm's length. Those would be the initial two signs that come to mind that are the most consistent for a narcissist.
Do they at some point intersect and we see similar behavior, or is it two different trajectories ongoing?
Lots of overlap. Lots
Okay.
of overlap. So no, usually, again, with that kind of little cycle we said, like the infinity symbol, if they go round and round, very often if you have one of those areas, you will have the other. And they kind of self-fulfill one another in that way. They feel more paranoid. Of course, any good organization, any good ministry, any good family is going to have love and affection spread out. But for someone who's a narcissist, especially when they're diagnosable, that affirms their paranoia and is evidence that they are right, that they are the one who has either been affronted or stolen from, and therefore they're justified in those other ways that they backstab or kind of cut someone else's legs out from under them.
Sure. Which makes it very difficult to approach someone who is a narcissist to talk about their behavior and what is going on.
Yeah, absolutely. One is part of why I think, and I know we'll probably get to these later, like you said, a little out of order, but part of where I think it's such a dangerous thing to try to confront someone who's a narcissist. I'm still for doing it in certain ways, and we will probably talk more about that as we go. But when you go in knowing that almost no matter what you say, even if it's just, tons of grace, tons of kindness, you're trying to stick to the same area of a conflict you may have with someone, you're coming in knowing that you're viewed as the enemy, and any kindnesses you give or any grace or forgiveness you provide is seen as suspect. And very often a narcissist will actually confuse forgiveness with no accountability. So like if I've been wronged by a narcissist and I say, hey, John, Jane, whoever it is, I forgive you. In their mind, there are no boundaries in that anymore. There's no accountability anymore. And you can never bring that up again in any way, because in their mind, and kind of narcissist lingo, they are blameless once again. And that can be a really, really hard thing when you're having one-on-one dialogue with anyone that's a narcissist.
Hmm. Well, let's go ahead and go into how would you approach someone then? or you would not approach someone. And I'm curious, so let's actually break this, Josh, because it might be varying answers. So let's break this into two different categories. I think it'd be really relevant for our listeners. In our personal lives, say a family member, a friend, someone like that, versus say someone on staff at the church, someone who's in a leadership position. Because the reason I draw that distinction is because there's times where in a leadership position, like something has to be done, right? So there has to be some kind of confrontation, conversation, say someone else who is on staff, for example, versus in our personal lives, we might handle that differently. We may have different options. So handing it over to you.
Of course. I would say in general, avoiding conflict with a narcissist is better. So like if you are around someone, and I'm saying this knowing for many people, they're going to be like, but Josh, this is not my reality. It is the family member, or I can't just leave my job or whatever it is. But I do think in general, just knowing that fighting fair is not on the table for a narcissist, hearing you and actually hearing your words is probably barely even going to happen. I actually think if we could kind of mentally get our heads into a narcissist's brain and hear their thoughts, it would be almost like those old Charlie Brown cartoons where it's wah, 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 as they're hearing an adult. I think for a narcissist, very often they are not listening or able to even hear kindness, approachability, those kinds of things, because their mind is going 100 miles an hour in terms of how do I get back at this person? How do I twist this to my advantage? And so there's very little even listening, let alone empathy. To your question of when you do have to confront, I think that's an area that's really important to keep things in writing and to, whenever possible, have other people who are there. Because very often the one-on-one area is just going to be so easy if you're confronting someone, like you said, at the church or whatever, being able to just go one-on-one verbally, it'll get twisted, it'll get forgotten, or your words will then be used against you in some way that often is kind of horrifyingly weird how they come up with something new and creative. So like an example, if you had a narcissistic employee at the church and you're one of the leaders there, very often they'll listen to you, they'll say the right thing, and then later you'll find out that they have badmouthed you in an area of weakness completely unrelated to what you're talking about. In families, you see the same thing, especially mildly narcissists or narcissistic thinkers that aren't quite diagnosable. They'll apologize, keep it really short so they don't have to sit in that uncomfortable feeling of, I made a mistake. But then you'll see later that some error you have made or some embarrassing situation will be brought out in front of others. And I've seen this happen at weddings. I've seen this happening at the toast of the wedding for a narcissist, where then they're just airing out things against a family member. I mean, anytime there's a podium is very often a fraught situation for payback.
Oh, those are the most awkward speeches at weddings.
Aren't they bad? I've seen way too many of them.
Yes, it's like you just roasted the groom or you roasted the bride. This is not celebratory. This is awkward. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, and unfortunately, we see that quite a bit. The sermon the next week, the training, all of a sudden that person is the example, or all of a sudden they're written up for something that everyone does. So, the showing up 10 minutes to work in a pretty relaxed environment, very often you become the martyr for something that everyone else has done as well, but now you're the one in trouble.
Yes. So it's targeted. You see that targeted element.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a very specific question. I'm laughing at myself because you're probably going to be like, this is oddly specific, but I'm curious about it. And it's because I have seen it happen. So I'll go ahead and own that. I have seen this happen, and I've seen it happen with more than one person. So it's not targeted to a specific person that I've crossed paths with, but I have known people who would meet the criteria for NPD, and I have seen crying used in a way that I've questioned. I've looked at it in two ways and I haven't been sure. And it doesn't happen a lot, but I've seen where it seems like it's been used to make them the victim. Like, okay, feel bad for me.
Sure.
But then I've also seen moments where I've thought it may have been a little bit of a breakthrough. Like they may have actually connected with something deeper for a brief moment in time. And then it goes back to business as usual.
Mm.
I'm curious, have you seen this? Either or both?
Nickname crocodile tears, right? So the idea of sometimes there are ways to kind of weaponize contriteness or for tears to be used. But absolutely, I do think that there are times, and again, I mean, I do not work with narcissists in order to just waste their time and waste my time. I believe that change can happen, but it's kind of like a boiling pot. Like if you almost think of a witch's cauldron, for a narcissist to actually own something, it feels boiling hot, it feels scathing, and yet they need to stay in that uncomfortable, overly painful emotion. And so for me, that's when I'm praying, honestly. That's when I'm like, oh my goodness, like, could this be a moment of ability to actually hear this message, to have genuine tears, and for it then not to be used later? I think narcissists tend to ruminate quite a bit, is one of the things that I've seen far too often. And so in the moment, can genuine care and even genuine repentance happen? Quite possibly, but where are they at in an hour? Or where are they at in a day or two or three? And in my opinion, that's when you really see, has true repentance occurred. I've seen plenty of people leave wonderful family sessions, church mediations, and things like that. And I'm like, oh, I think we got somewhere. And it can be true, but so often, unfortunately, the next day, the week after, whatever it is, they've put back on their mask and they will act like that either has not occurred or their narrative of what happened is so different than even video evidence would suggest. So it's a great moment, and it's when truly you're hoping and praying that it sticks, because that's going to be really uncomfortable for a narcissist to stay there.
Yes. And that is so painful for the others involved, because you see this hope of, oh my goodness, we've gotten somewhere. And then as you're sharing, Josh, not only oftentimes does the progression discontinue, but what actually happened, the goodness of that is taken back. It's
Yes.
like, wait, but something was owned. And it's like, so you don't actually own it? We're like right back to, oh, that is brutal. That is brutal for somebody. Yeah, we absolutely see that across the board. Certainly when we're talking about spiritual abuse. And when I'm referencing spiritual abuse for anyone who's newer to beEmboldened, I'm not just talking about within a church. I'm not strictly talking about someone who has a paid position as the senior pastor, for example, or the worship leader, whatever it may be on staff. It could be a volunteer position. It could be someone who has more of a mentorship type role over someone else, someone that you look up to. It can happen within your family, within your home, between partners, with children as they're getting older. That absolutely can happen with kiddos as well. We see it on the mission field. We see it in parachurch organizations. We see it in secular organizations where someone is open about their faith and then they're using that in ways, with those who are also Christian. It's kind of like a buddy system, but then it's manipulated. So this can look like a lot of different things. So while we're using and oftentimes use church examples because they're easy examples to use, most people can wrap their heads around it. I just want to ensure that everyone knows we're not exclusively talking about that. Looks like a lot of different things. And certainly when we're talking about narcissism, we can see this pop up anywhere.
No, I appreciate you clarifying that too.
Are there any initial flags? I know we touched on this a little bit. I want to go back to it, see if there's anything else to add. I want to make sure we've exhausted this question. Are there any other initial flags, those like little yellow flags maybe that we could be throwing to catch this in someone earlier on in order to protect ourselves, and depending on the position maybe we hold, protect others as well?
I wish there were one that was really clear. Honestly, then I think that there wouldn't be such a hot topic around narcissism. I think there's a lot of yellow flags that can add up. So, we talked about, can someone actually give a genuine apology for a mistake they made? But that takes time. And so often you'll hear these apologies that feel close, even from people who aren't narcissistic, because we're not really good at owning our stuff, right? We have sins, we have our own struggles. And so while I think that's probably the most clear cut one I see of someone that gives a mistakes were made apology, or gives an apology where you made a mistake before, but I reacted poorly, That's a clear-cut one, but actually what I tend to see is more the structure around a narcissist changes relatively quickly. So, what I mean by that is you may have heard that many narcissists do not have particularly close friends, or they have people they talk about like they're close friends. But then you talk to that guy or that gal, and you find out, oh, they haven't actually been over to the narcissist house in months or years, or they only see them in groups. And yet, the narcissist goes above and beyond talking about just how great this person is because they're trying to kind of show you could have this relationship with me if you do what I ask. And so, actually, what I tend to look for first when it comes to signs as I'm entering a new group or as I'm talking with someone is who are the equals around this person that could be narcissistic? And are those people actually people that speak their mind, or are they conflict avoidant? I think one of the first signs for a narcissist is they are usually at the top of something, whether it's the best or their position is higher or whatever it is. And you have a lot of yes men and women that may be great people who have a lot of kindness, oftentimes have a gift of mercy that a narcissist will exploit in certain ways. And yet, when it comes to gifts of prophecy, people who are really, more the D on the disc, more the dominant, or kind of, 8 on the Enneagram, if you love those different personality assessments, those people tend to be fairly far from a narcissist because that would be natural conflict. Those conflict styles actually enjoy and find intimacy through being able to point out faults in each other. And for a narcissist, that is far too much of a trigger, far too much of an insecurity exposing moment. And so they will either keep distance from that person or punish that person. And usually that person is not in an inner circle for very long.
And I've seen that it's not always an explosive response. Would you agree with that? The narcissist is not always exploding when someone is trying to have that conversation, that maybe corrective conversation of, hey, like this was done and this is how it was for me and this is how I felt. And I wonder if we could talk that through. And I don't always see a response of that person gets irate because we can see that sometimes from the pulpit. We can see that. I hear that definitely in stories that are shared with me for sure. It doesn't always look like that though. It can be better played than that, where it seems like, similar to what you share with the example of the family meeting, it seems like maybe progress has been made. It seems like, but there can also be some gaslighting that goes on where we might walk away thinking, well, wait, maybe I misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you mentioned a term earlier that I was really glad you brought up of covert narcissism. I actually think very often the narcissist is the calmest person in the room and the most clear person in the room because they haven't had to worry about truth. They haven't had to worry about nuance. They have that black and white thinking, like we mentioned earlier, of one of those traits. And so they're able to be very convicted and calm. Very often, as someone who's experienced trauma from this person, is the irate person, is sinning in their anger, to use an often weaponized area of church. And yet they're trying to share, no, this is the person who's done wrong. This is the person who's harmed. And so victim blaming is so common. And like you said, gaslighting and just being that kind of covert, surreptitious narcissist. We see, especially in religious circles, or especially where being loud is automatically held against you.
I'm thinking of examples where familial language is used, like family, like, oh, we're like family and we're this and we're that. And sometimes really soon, like, are we though? Like we just kind of met, we just kind of,
yes.
But I guess I'm being agreeable today. So I could see why maybe that's resonating with the narcissist. So, but it's like almost too much too soon. I want to be cautious because there can be some other possibilities at play with some of these, like borderline personality disorder. This could kind of go into that direction with what I'm sharing here. So I'm not saying this is exclusive for narcissism, but if you present as someone that they would want in their kind of quote unquote inner circle for what that looks like for them, then it's all good, right? It's, wow, you're like family, we're close, you're this, you're that. And then it's, well, wait, I need something now. And if this is a mutual relationship, there's going to be some reciprocity here. And so we're going to show up for one another, and we're going to care when one another is going through something. You're going to care if you accidentally hurt my feelings. You're going to care if I'm hurting in general. Like you shared earlier about the lack of empathy. They're not necessarily going to care if you're hurting. They're not necessarily going to be able to show up. In fact, it sounds like most likely they would not be. And it gets really messy within the church in particular because of that family language that the church likes to use. And depending on what our background has been with family already, our family of origin, it just compounds so quickly. It can really affect someone's ability to trust, someone's ability to feel safe in a relationship, ability to attach in a healthy way. So I just wanted to speak to that briefly, and I'd love any thoughts that you have.
Completely agree with what you're saying. And I think it's one of the areas, too, where people are able to actually think that they've seen empathy when they haven't. So for everyone, different podcasts, like I know Rise and Fall of Mars Hill talks about this, you hear these just magnificent acts of kindness from a narcissist. You see someone that has been so kind and so attentive to a person, but it's always got a little bit of spotlight to it, or it's very quick. I think very often narcissists can be incredibly kind to people that are not in their kind of inner circle. They're able to be so kind to the stranger, the person on the street, the new individual at work or in the ministry. And very often they kind of do that intentionally, in my opinion, in order to show, look at how empathetic and compassionate I am. But there's no relationship with that person. They're a new person. And so I love what you're saying about how there's this family language or even just these magnificent acts of kindness. I would say very often when you look at someone that's going to have more of a chronic struggle, like a narcissist with someone who's really depressed and it's not going to get better anytime soon, or someone who's grieving, like we just had so many horrific things happen in the Texas area. Very often the narcissist will show up the first day or two, but then will disappear when it's the long, hard, slow, and uninteresting work of helping someone slowly heal, slowly grieve. And so anything like that that is not able to be done quickly and kind of spotlight on, very often you will not see a narcissist around anymore. They were there for the first bit. They were there for the picture, so to speak, or the sermon illustration. And they are quickly gone whenever it's like, no, now's the real work getting done.
I love your reference that you made to the spotlight moment. Yeah, because that can still be seen as positive attention for someone, depending on all of the dynamics going on. There still is a spotlight, and that can be attractive to somebody, especially if they then are disingenuous, albeit, but they're coming across in some way that they are repentant, they are wanting to apologize, they are seeing themselves and they are recognizing, and they're going to, and there can be a lot of empathy, a lot of forgiveness for someone in that posture, to the point that the accountability just goes right back out the window. And that's something I think we can struggle with as Christians of, well, we want to be forgiving, we want to be merciful, we also do need that accountability. And when people are genuinely going to change, it's going to take more than like a 6-week sabbatical. It's going to be a long time. And so we need to step out for a long time. Maybe someone still steps in down the road. Depends on what happened. Depending on what happened, no, never. Maybe there's room at some point in the future. Again, nuanced question depending on the person and the story. But it's not going to be quick. And I really appreciate how you're hitting that home, Josh. If this is not going to be a quick change for somebody, this is something where someone really needs to be removed.
Absolutely. And that's not to then minimize the people who had wonderful experiences. I think that's one of the hardest things I hear from people as they're healing is, let's say you had a parent who was a narcissist, and you're going to have people come up all the time and be like, oh my gosh, you're so-and-so's kid. They're amazing. And you're going to hear this time and time and time again. And that's why when I'm working with a family member, we talk about circles of control. Narcissists are incredible with people they have little to no control over. That's kind of how they get a hook in and then draw them closer to their inner circles, which is very often a vapid wasteland of pain. Moments of glee, moments of kindness, of generosity, but more and more hooks as you just feel really almost like you're being gaslit because you see kindness all around you, and yet you are hurting by that parent. You are hurting by that family member who for some reason seems just to pour anger and judgment and shame on you while they praise and almost act like they're just worshipful of other people. And so, no, I mean, that level of kind of narcissist, that diagnosable person, I actually encourage people to really give a lot of space for usually up to a year and a half before we even know if any of the change is really sticking. Those in therapy circles often talk about kind of the rubber band mentality of a rubber band you can stretch, but it'll always go back to its shape. And it takes a long, long time, a lot of consistent work and pressure for a rubber band to reform anew to where it's in the new shape. And I think for anyone with a personality disorder, whether you're listening and you know someone who's narcissistic or borderline or anywhere else, that reforming is going to take time. And it's best for you to still be kind and gracious, but also be aware that just because they've been good for 2, 3, 4, even 6 months does not mean that they are less narcissistic than they were before. They are still in that kind of trial period.
Yes, that is a helpful amount of time for people to be aware of. Again, in personal lives as well. If you are allowing space, you've created some stronger boundaries with someone and they're claiming that, okay, I'm working on this. I recognize we're going to see in time. And something that came to mind a little bit earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and speak to it now. I think for those of us who have gone through a period of time and maybe cycle back to it, depends on someone's journey, where we're really not sure of our identity. We're really struggling. I see this a lot actually when people have come out of a high control environment and they're trying to get their feet under them. And it's a really vulnerable time in somebody's life of, no, I don't really know who I am. I don't know my worth and my value. In fact, I probably think that I don't have any is more likely to be the case. And I don't know who to trust. I don't trust my ability to discern who's good to trust. Like there's just all of this that someone's going through. And when somebody then seems to see you and is really flattering, it can really touch on those vulnerable areas that we have during that time. And it can be a way of hooking, like you were just talking about. And that's where I then see revictimization happen in somebody's life, because those vulnerabilities are capitalized on, they're exploited, they are not nurtured and cared for. And as you're sharing, Josh, that empathy piece isn't going to be genuine. Now, I'm thinking of someone that I had in my life at one point who was it seemed, was a really good listener.
Yeah.
He was a good listener. I mean, he'd just sit and would listen. And because of the listening, it would feel like, oh, I guess I could share a bit more, or I could. But then nothing was actually ever done with what was shared, which was actually a good thing because it could have been used in a bad way. Like, I could have been talked about, or I could have, not that I was sharing anything that was like a big disclosure, just kind of talking. But
right.
In theory, right, we've seen that happen, of course, where it's then used as ammo against someone. But I noticed over a period of time, wow, we're having these conversations about hurts that were done and things like that in the relationship, and they're listening. But not only is nothing really changing in a positive way, there's also just more distance happening in the relationship. Like they're not reaching out so much anymore. Yeah. They said that we were like family, but we're not. Like they're canceling things now.
Yeah, the withdrawal of fellowship, kind of the silent treatment.
But over a period of time, not this like, and you're done, which definitely can happen. More of a, oh, okay. Well, and I will say, and anyone else, feel free to borrow this. If that is what family is going to look like, I've already had that family.
Yes.
And I don't really want it again. I already went through it one time. I'm not doing it a second time. So that's my stance on it. I think that's a very healthy stance to have. Like if we're looking for genuine, healthy relationships, people are really working on themselves. They have that self-awareness. They're wanting to have those hard conversations when they're needed. We don't need to all get real, get deep all the time. You just have fun as well. Laugh, have a good time. It's important to have flexibility, right? We need a range in our relationships of how we interact with someone. But I want to share that for any of you who are in that stage where you're like, Naomi, that would be me right now. Like, I don't really know who to trust. I don't feel like I'm not solid in my identity and who I am, who God is, where I'm at with that as well, with my faith and my worldview. Just recognizing if there's someone in your life who is overly flattering, maybe something seems kind of off, maybe they seem larger than life, just don't ignore if something is like something I'll ask myself if someone pays me a compliment, which I'm grateful. I'm so not a words of affirmation person. I thank the Lord for that, because it's just someone gives me a compliment, I just don't really care. It doesn't, and it's not because I just think I'm awesome. It just doesn't do something for me, which I'm glad it doesn't do something for me. Not that I don't want my husband to say he loves me or that I look pretty or something. Sometimes that's wonderful, but it just doesn't really do it. I have a friend who's very much words of affirmation. And so for me, it's more quality time. If someone invites me to hang out, then I'm like, oh, we're going to be such good friends, because I'm more of a quality time person. So we all have our areas, right? We all have that to be aware of. So when someone pays a compliment, it doesn't sit right if the person doesn't know me well enough to say that. And so that's something that I'll kind of use. I'll just use that as a little, they could totally mean it. It could just be a kindness. But it is a little sign of caution for me of, oh, okay, I'm not going to let that go deep. I'm not going to let that create a deeper connection. I'm going to just have a little bit of a caution. I'm going to have patience. I'm going to see where this relationship goes. I'm not going to just jump in. And so I'd offer that for anyone else to consider. If someone is going to say something about you, do they know enough about you to say it? Because I don't think it's a word from the Lord. We talk about that more in another conversation, but I don't think it's a word from the Lord. I think that person is probably saying something maybe out of turn, maybe out of an agenda that they have. And so I would say just slow down. And it might even be true. It may even be true. Someone might say, wow, you're just such a generous person. I really admire that about you. And you might actually be, but do they have evidence to know that about you? And I'm going to tell you, Josh, anytime I've had key people in my life who were that way, they were very flattering, and they would every single time, terrible, bad news. Don't get involved.
Yeah.
So it hasn't failed me.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but I think that's a great kind of yellow flag, a great warning sign of something's different there. Something's suspect.
Yeah. Like, wow, I'm glad you think I'm awesome, but you actually don't know me well enough to think I'm awesome. So we're going to just hold tight. Let's see if you think I'm awesome in another 6 months after we've had a couple of issues we've had to work through. Then we'll see, then maybe it'll mean more.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned kind of that closer area, right? Like that almost paternal or maternal level of identity speaking. I think that's one of the areas, especially in hierarchical structures. So places with a lot of bosses, a lot of structure, ministries that are very, even denominations that tend to be very much, submit to the elders, to the church, to the pastor, whatever structure it is. So often you see that and you're like, but you don't know. And so I love that you're bringing that up. And I think that's a really practical example.
What do you think are some best practices, best ways to engage with someone who does have NPD? And we may not know officially if they do or not, but they seem to be meeting what we're talking about today.
Yeah. So I would say it definitely kind of look at, okay, are you seen as a threat first off, which many of us are like, are you kidding? I'm Naomi, I'm Josh. Like, I'm not threatening. What are you talking about? But for a narcissist, someone that's really gifted, or someone that has respect of peers, someone that has actually worked hard, cared for others well, is very often threatening because of that zero-sum game. And so I tend to interact with a narcissist very differently if I think that in some ways, just by nature of being me, there's some jealousy or some paranoia. If I'm someone that they see as a threat or having authority, then I want to come in very gentle, but also very specific with an area that I'm going to interact with them on. So there's a lot of spending time getting to know them and getting to know what their value, and then trying to talk to the narcissist about areas that are not perfect. And I even use perfect language because most people, unless they're severely narcissistic, they know they're not perfect. They know they have mistakes. And so a coworker, for example, that's narcissistic, I may come in and talk about areas that we're all working on and growing. But I'm talking about it in a way where I'm also sharing. I'm also being a little vulnerable, but in a way where I'm using we to bring up We all need to work more about our efficiency here. We all need to get more and messages out for Jesus, whatever it is, as we're talking over a tension point. And I'm watching them as how they interact. Do they take it? Do they turn it? Can they hear? And so very specific areas if I'm an authority, with a lot of then also trying to help them be able to recognize that no one is perfect is the language I use if I'm viewed up there by a narcissist. If I'm someone that I see as they think they're an authority over me, or they see me as weak or underneath them in some ways, then I'm very much trying to keep things to the point. It's business and business only, so in ministry, very often that's meeting with your narcissistic boss or a parent, meeting with them as they get ready for the big family Thanksgiving or whatever. It's trying to say, okay, here's the agenda. I email it to them. And then I make sure that we stay on that agenda of here's what we're doing for our family Thanksgiving, or here's the areas that we're going to cover for the family trip. And as soon as we start to get off topic, because narcissists are notorious for grabbing the microphone and taking control, I'm very quick to detach. And I think that's called getting off the roller coaster. It's the idea of you don't need to stay and you have choice and agency to hang up the phone, to leave the room, to be able to go because we're no longer on the agenda. And so anyone where I'm seen as captive by that narcissist, I'm very much sticking to the point, going through the bullets, and then adjusting from there.
I love how you shared you can get off the phone. You can get off the roller coaster, and you don't have to further engage in that conversation, because if you boil it all down, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
You're just not. And someday, somehow, maybe like, well, today, this is where we're at. Reminds me of conversations I would have in a different position that I held working in hospice, where it was just it's a really highly emotionally charged time in a family's life. And there are times where we would get calls where someone would be really just upset over something. And I understood that there's a lot of emotions going on, wanted to support. But if someone's yelling, if they're whatever, it's like, we can't right now. And so I would share with them on the call, I really want to be present with you, and I want to come alongside you in solving this and in hearing you. I'm not able to do that right now. And so when I'm done speaking, I'm going to hang up, and I look forward to you calling back when we're able to have a conversation, because I do want to provide that support, but I can't do it right now. And then I would hang up. And in an hour or two, they would call back and we'd have a great conversation. And whatever the nurses did wrong, we'd fix it. And yeah, that's a little bit of an inside joke between social workers and nurses. But so
there's always a natural sharpening there.
So it's good to be able to do that. We do not need to stick around until something is resolved, because resolution may not be available at that time or with that person, period.
Yeah. No, I think with a narcissist, there's so much to lose by actually resolving things. There's so much built into you versus them, like you're sharing with this old job and whatnot, where it's going to be really, really hard for them to want to resolve things. In fact, I would imagine that for most narcissists, they're actually a little more calm, lower heart rate, less blood pressure in a really conflict-ridden moment than you would be as someone who's not a narcissist, because you care about the relationship. You want things to go well with this colleague, this family member. And for the narcissist, that no empathy also means very little care at all, and no care out of what does not affect them. So I've heard it said that a narcissist would rather be hated and vilified than forgotten. And I think even those little boundaries of distance are so valuable for you to heal, and also for a narcissist to then have to face that they don't have full control, that they can be left alone when they are just treating someone horribly.
Right. That it's unacceptable. It's not actually going to work. So I also want to mention, and Josh, ask you about this. I think I would say most often, at least at this point, in my environments that I'm in. Narcissists are talked about pretty badly and fair. I also want to speak to, though, that people can still very much feel the loss of someone in their lives who is a narcissist. There is, you were speaking to this earlier about, they tend to be really good at different things. They can be like, we can want to hear what they have to say. We can want to follow along. There can be ways in which the relationship was something appealing to us, or just what they were offering the world in ways was something we really admired, maybe even aspired to. And so I want to speak to that heart posture for those of us who have had to cut that relationship, that it still is a loss in ways. And of course, overall, I think I would agree with you, Josh. It can be incredibly necessary for us to need to do. While we may remain hopeful that at some point they will seek support and it will change, it can be so necessary. And we may not, in this lifetime, on the side of Jesus returning, we may not see that reconciliation that we desire to. But yeah, I want to go ahead and pause there, Josh, and see if you have something you'd want to add about. There is a grief that can come just the same.
And I think the grief is almost twofold, because I agree, it's such a big loss when you have had a close, let's say, family, romantic partner, mentor, anything like that, when someone has been a narcissist, because so often the good is so good. And so I see kind of two griefs for most people. One is just the loss of someone that really was there for you and had these beautiful moments. But very often a narcissist, kind of like you said, those compliments that were a little too above and beyond. So often those moments of extreme kindness, of generosity, of deep compassion, being there with you in the darkest time, is something that a narcissist often kind of enjoys and then justifies you owing them. And very often, actually, a healthy person won't be as intense. It won't be as close a relationship, a mentorship that's a little more laissez-faire. And so I think you're grieving two things in the end. One is the loss of someone who had those good moments or good seasons where you weren't being judged and shamed by them. But then also it's kind of an adjustment to the fact that was fool's gold, the fact that actually was glittering but not gold. And reality, close relationships, mentors, parents, all of those are not going to hit that level of intense intimacy because they're boundaried, because they're healthy. And so that secondary loss of adjusting to healthy relationships for many people, and I hope people out there are listening, may even have a person come to their mind where it's a healthy person, but you find yourself feeling like the relationship is a little tepid, or it's a little cool or lackluster. If you've recently been around a narcissist and you're in the recovery process, your body, your heart, your soul are adjusting to a healthy normal. And very often, if you don't kind of sit through that period, you end up kind of narcissist hopping from one bad experience to another, because you're so used to the lie that incredibly intense intimacy is the true thing when it is not.
Ooh, so note to our editing team, that needs to be a reel, because this is for everybody else. Josh, I have that conversation so often because many who come to Be Emboldened have come out of these intense, high control environments where everybody's sharing everything. That's the expectation. And I don't just mean possessions necessarily. I'm talking about like heart, soul, mind. I mean, they are to tell it all. And that is then what feels like rich, deep, fulfilling connection in life for this individual. And all of the healthy relationships after are just such a letdown. They don't feel as satisfying. And it can seem like, it's just a bummer in comparison. And I've lived that myself,
really
because
is.
I've had relationships like that back when, I grew up in a cult. And so there were relationships like that. And your community just kind of built in, and not that it has to be a cult necessarily. I'm just speaking to myself personally, but you come out and then, everything you're lackluster. Yeah. It's just, it doesn't hit the same. And yet being 20 years removed at this point, depending on what date, what exact moment in my life we're talking about, it's so much better over here. It is a lot better.
Wonderful.
So it is, right? It is worth going through that adjustment period and recognizing what healthy does look like, because there's a lot of toxicity in what we're talking about that presents as being those rich, deep connections. 1,000%. I probably had 4 or 5 conversations about this in the past week. That's literally how prevalent it is.
Oh, I'll believe it.
And these conversations. Yeah. And so it's really powerful that you shared that. Thank you so much. I'm glad that came up. So what if someone is sitting here listening and they realize, oh, wait, this kind of sounds like me in some ways. Maybe they're doing some self-identifying in the moment, or they're seeing, oh, I have some elements of this. I could see where maybe over time, if unchecked, I could go further in this direction. I'm not wanting to do that. What would be a next step? What hope is there?
I mean, as I say this, I'll be grinning from ear to ear because, I mean, that's just such a wonderful moment. It's kind of that Saul becoming Paul on the road to Damascus, right? Like just that light coming down and just that moment of like, no, I need to change. And so, I mean, if you're sitting here and you're listening to this, like absolutely re-listen to this clip, re-sit back, and don't let yourself get distracted. I think so much of what tends to happen for someone when they have that moment of penitence and kind of realization is it's easy to put it off. It's easy to just wait, or to kind of recognize this will take a lot of work and to be scared of being known and seen. So I love the image even of the, Wizard of Oz with the little man behind the curtain. If you're feeling like that little man, know that little man is loved genuinely, that you have worth, not grandiosity, not king likeness or queen likeness, but that you have value just by who you are. You don't have to have the accolades, the accomplishments, and this kind of performance identity that just always continues to feel ravenous. So if you're sitting out there, absolutely share with someone, re-listen to this, and then recognize the help is going to feel torturous for the first while. And so you're committing to the long game. But on the other side of all that work, of all that, probably people all of a sudden coming out and actually being harsh, saying things that they may not have felt safe to say before, inviting that in and recognizing this is change. This is improvement. I actually think it's really interesting just to see someone finally taste that genuine relationship is on the other side. Genuinely being known and accepted for who you are and loved, and not having to race and pant and just push until the end of time. And so if that's appealing to you, if you want that peace, if you want your mind to still, and you want to actually be able to be known and seen for who you are and loved as you are, then please absolutely reach out to someone, get in some regular therapy, and be able to then begin that journey and be patient as you start to see the fruit down the road.
That was beautifully stated. And if you happen to be someone who is in the state of Texas or in the state of Colorado, you could reach out to Josh's practice specifically. Again, it's called River's Edge Counseling and Wellness. And he has locations throughout, several in Texas. And is it one in Colorado?
Yeah, we have 4 in Texas, Austin, Bernie, College Station, and Houston. So throughout the state of Texas, and then remote counselors in Colorado as well.
Remote in Colorado. Okay, great. Yes, because I know oftentimes people, they'll listen to us and they'll feel like, okay, I think I trust this person. I want to reach out. So we will also link the information below. Please feel free to reach out. Again, if you're in either of those 2 states. And for our audience, if anything in this conversation has resonated with you and you'd like to learn more about these topics, if you want to learn more about beEmboldened's programs, our services, please go to beEmboldened.com. You can also subscribe here to get notified of our next episode. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.